Well, you're welcome back. The state of states is what we're considering now. It's no news that Nigeria is in a recession, and a lot of times we talk about the federal level, the Minister of Finance, the President, and all that. But the question this morning is, looking at states across the Federation, what can we do with them, in quotes, to get Nigeria out of this recession? What have we done and what can we do better? And I mean, a particular organization that has been doing research about the state of status budget. So this morning we have joining us Onigbinde, the Director of Budget. He joins us via Zoom on the program. Well, thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily.
It's a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, great to have you. Well, by saying a lot of times we pay attention to the federal government, what the government at that level is doing to get us out of recession, to ensure that our inflation drops. Yes, the CBN has, the power to make those decisions, but just how important are states in this equation?
Thank you so much. I mean, if we look at the FAC, which is the federal allocation, 48.5% passes through the states, so it's very important to look at that. Also, the value-added tax, 85%, 50% to the state, 35% to the states, to the local government. So that also passes through the state. The payee, the payroll tax also is fully collected by the state. So a lot is happening within the state. A whole lot of Nigerian states also cannot survive on their independent revenues, so internal revenues, as some call it. So they depend mostly on the federation revenues that is distributed centrally. And it's very, very important to pay attention to the state because the CBN can provide some stopgap support to the federal government. And even though there's some limitations in the CBN Act, recent occurrences have shown that the CBN has just continuously provided that support some an unlimited manner. But for the states, there is a challenge in that. They are limited in how much support they can get from the CBN. And most times, what they have gotten has been the refund for the Paris Club debt. Sometimes they've gotten refund for projects that were delivered within the state, capital projects that were developed in the state. Beyond that, there has been nothing concrete that's come from the CBN to the state. So it's very, very important that states also start thinking clearly. But one thing that it's important that we have to put down is that states need to start being production centers and not just distribution zones. I mean, it's not just about picking up FAC allocation. States have to start looking inwards about what value can they provide within the Nigerian state and what opportunities lie within their state. Because without them not improving IGR, without them not improving internal revenues and creating growth, they cannot meet the needs of their people. And the only option that they have to do is to continually raise debt, which will have serious repercussions for the state in the near term. Yeah.
But Mr. Onigbinde, when you talked about states becoming production centers on their own, a number of times that has been raised. Fingers have been pointed at the Constitution as being a limiting factor to what states can do on their own. For instance, as everyone does, that there's hardly a state in Nigeria, there's hardly a region in Nigeria that cannot stand on its own economically, but they are limited by the Constitution, the executive exclusive lists, and all of that. So in that regard, do you still think that it is possible for the states to produce with those limitations notwithstanding?
Yeah, there are limitations. And I think, to change the Constitution is a straightforward approach. You need the National Assembly, you need the State Houses of Assembly. So if the state governors really want the Constitution changed, if they want to remove off some clauses that limit them, they can do that. I mean, we have to stop infantilizing the Nigerian's governance system. They can do what if they feel that this is imperative for their survival or their existence. So, and one of the critical things that would limit, not even just about things that are limited by the Constitution. That's to do more about things around the port system. So even if you want to build an export market from a state, how efficient is the federal port system? Infrastructure, the road infrastructure network that would connect you to the port, or build or take goods around. Mostly those roads will be federal projects. Even if you do all the roads within your state, how do you bring it down to the mainstream? You also are going to look at even issues of funding and financing, and also even production. So, I mean, but there are
You've
some things you
spoken
can do
very,
easy.
forgive me, you've spoken very, very interestingly about the fact that the governors can do it if they want to. The question is, do they want to? We'll try to answer that one for them when we return from this break. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Mr. Onigbinde, there are those who believe that since Nigeria is in a recession, that will be done to pull us out of recession should come more from the states than from the federal government. Now, given the report that your organization has released and the fact that a good number of states do not have the resources to even spend as is, much less spend out of recession, what are the implications?
The implications, we're going to go back to where we were in 2015, a situation where 24 out of 36 states were not able to pay salaries. And that's the implication. Right now, based on our reports, we know that 8 states are already going to have liquidity challenges if they don't either reduce their recurrent expenditure or they have to grow revenue. And it's difficult to grow revenue in the pandemic or in the current recession. Because this is the time you are supposed to provide support for business, tax reliefs for organization. This is not the time for you to unnecessarily increase the burden on people or businesses. So there is a challenge in there. And I don't think that opportunity is going to come from the states. The states don't have the power to print money. They don't have the power to summon the CBN to provide support to them. So the only opportunity they have is just to keep rationalizing the cost or keep finding a way to keep expanding revenue. There's nothing beyond that. And do much more work around efficiency. And also look towards the federal government for support. I mean, there was a 1 billion naira support that was given to each state, but technically that would not go far. The only way is to rethink the Nigerian system around making it more about production. States need to be production centers. Every state needs to come to the matrix. I mean, we have National Economic Council. That meeting should be about what exactly as a state am I bringing to the table. I mean, it could be about my natural resources and positioning. So a state that produces cement can be bringing cement to the table as limestone. It could be about services. It could be I could position myself to be a business process outsourcing center. I could be position myself to be a garment export processing center. I mean, you have to sit down. And it could even be exotic foods. I mean, Kenya has a $1 billion flower market, and we can grow these exotic fruits and flowers in Plateau State. So it's not impossible. It just takes some form of dedication and purpose and incentivizing that process. And that's my whole point. That every time the CBN tries to bail out states to pay salaries, I think it's not solving the problem. CBN should bail out states to be productive centers. The states that have ideas and agenda around how they want to be productive engines or how they want to really solve critical issues for the country. Those are the people that the CBN should back. Not every time we're having fiscal crisis, then it's about CBN supporting states in one way or the other. And I think that is the existential question for Nigeria. Because when we talk about Nigeria, we're looking at the summation of 36 states at the end of it. The federal government can have some oversight on some certain roles in the economy. But if we don't have states that are solid and strong, I mean, we can't move forward. I mean, an average state in Nigeria, I mean, almost 18 out of 36 states in Nigeria have IGR less than 36 billion naira. I mean, what exactly are you going to do with 2 billion?
To those details, Mr. Onigbinde, but there is something. Yeah, just a moment. We'll come to those details. I know Kade is itching to go on that one, but you know, there is something that you mentioned about the 8 states that are worst hit with the financial distress, and we know. Economically, everyone talks about the fact that it's the micro, small, and medium enterprises that literally champion, fund the economy of any environment or any state or any nation at that. Given the challenges that those states have, and the fact that the micro, small, and medium enterprises ought to have a major stake in the scheme of things, where does that leave the SMEs in those states in particular, and perhaps across board?
I mean, you've had a great question, and to be honest, maybe apart from Lagos State, because he has the financial capacity to do so, and the federal government, I've not seen a state rolling out robust support from the SMEs within the states. And if we're going to accelerate jobs effectively, if we're going to be able to provide real support to the economy, that's a space that we have to look much more in. And I think more of what the states needs to come across around with is with the federal government. The federal government has a payroll protection scheme. I think the state needs to tap into that. Like I said, apart from Lagos State that has the financial capacity, most states in Nigeria are incapacitated. A lot of states that could have done better are the South states because they have the 13% derivation. But in a very strange form, they run one of the highest overhead costs within the country, and don't even at budget, we are really always shocked at the size of the overhead cost of states like Bayelsa, Delta, Akwa Ibom State. I mean, those are real challenges on the corner. So in a way, the state government needs to sit down with the federal government. I mean, this is the wholesome economy. What are you going to do to support? And because the conversation on productivity or making state production center is not a short term, it's not a sprint, it's not a short term conversation. It requires dedication, it requires tenacity, and it requires multiple election cycles with focused leadership. So that exactly will not happen suddenly. But right now, to protect SMEs is to protect their payroll, to protect SMEs is to ensure that they get tax reliefs, and which is part of what is in the current Finance Act of the Federal or Finance Bill of the federal government. I think states need to also be able to sensitize SMEs to take advantage of such schemes. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that quite a number of states can't afford, their recurrent, they can't afford their recurrent expenditure. And based on the analysis you've done, in fact, you've done projections for 2020, I believe. But the question now is, this did not happen on the states, right? This is not something they were born with. This is a process that led to where we are right now. So what's responsible for that in the first place, really? Because we're looking at the years ahead. So it's important to learn from maybe the mistakes or the inactions of the past. So how did the states get into this in the first place?
And you have to divide it into separate parts because a lot of states got into, some had legacy issues. It's still like Oyo with other legacy issues because, being the capital of the Western region, carry their own backlog of huge personnel cost and also size of its population. So, and has not been able to grow its revenue. So, for example, you have Ogun State has IGR of 75 to 78 billion naira annually. Oyo State has an IGR of around 30 billion naira. So the gap just keeps being there. Compared to Lagos State with an IGR of close to 300 up to close to 400 billion naira. So you have a state like Oyo, you have to be able to define that legacy issues and not being able to grow revenue significantly over the years. You have a state like Osun that it was about poor fiscal management. Debt was borrowed beyond the limit or the capacity of the state. So the risk analysis for that state was not good enough. You might think $100 oil was going to be forever, but people who are proper risk analysts will tell you that this is a commodity that is driven around different cycles. So you have to make adjustments for those risks. And there are some states that the reason why they are in this crisis is just because of overhead costs beyond normal, beyond reasonable levels. In our own analysis, you should not run overhead more than 15 to 20% of your total recurrent expenditure. And when you start running overheads beyond that, then you start getting things around Bauchi start struggling. You start finding states like around Kogi also start struggling because he has legacy issues around personnel costs that were not paid, and the new governor is still trying. I don't want to call him a new governor, but Governor Yabil is still trying to clear that out, and it looks like it's a hole that doesn't get closed. So what I advise states much more is this: be much more, and this is not the time because when the economy is in boom, when maybe oil prices are high and the fact receipts are great, those are the times that you can really, really implement hard reforms and be able to rationalize your personnel or to be able to make them much more efficient. But at this point, it will not be the best time to say, okay, let some workers go. And that's number one. Number two is also have to be gross efficient on your overhead costs. Number three, you also have to be very much more aggressive on revenue collections. And it's a simple conversation. People talk about Lagos State has great IGR, but Lagos State has great IGR because it has the largest cluster of formal organizations in the country. It's easy to collect taxes if you have formal organizations in the state. If you have too many informal organizations, or they are not formalizing, or the process of formalization is challenging, then definitely there will be problem you even be able to take taxes. And the question has to be simple. A state has to find a way to attract formal businesses, organizations to its own spaces. I mean, and that's the way it makes it easy for you to take taxes. It will shock you that if you look at the World Bank doing business report, more than 30 states in Nigeria perform worse than the sub-Saharan African average when it comes to ease of doing business. So that means our states are not even doing well at all. So those are the conversations that states have to even sit down and ask. How do we make the process of doing business in our states much more better? How do we become a magnet for talent, technology talent, service delivery talent, those who are even trying to even do export market talent? How do we become a talent? How do we attract investment? A whole lot of investment to this country in the last 5 to 6 years have oscillated between Lagos, Ogun, and Kaduna State. How do other states also think about what exactly are these states doing right that we can build upon and also be able to attract investment? So, and if you can see, those states are also have shown incredible increase in their in internally generated revenue, and that exactly is the story that states have to sit down and ask themselves. Because if we wait to say there's a problem at the federal level or there are binding issues in the constitution, that's why we can't move forward, then we take it out. Then we have a conversation to remove them. The incentives that states have to have the incentive to grow. If the only incentive is to share allocation at every month or every quarter, then there is not going to be progress.
Yeah.
That process has to be reformed. Yeah.
So clearly, ease of doing business is not a constitutional thing because we have states that are doing well there. So other states don't have to wait for constitution review to, make doing business easier in their states. Before we move on, really, I'd like to take you up on something you mentioned, saying that, a state's overhead should not be more than 50% of the revenue. That sounds like, if states will want to adhere strictly to that, that will mean cutting their personnel base. That will mean retrenching, pretty much. Isn't that it?
When I mean overheads, I'm not trying to explain personnel. I mean your cost of running government. You have to buy plane tickets. You have to pay for water bills. You have to find a way to aggregate those expenses and make sure that you are grossly efficient around it. Your administrative expenses. Governor Peter Obi is the one that animates this conversation effectively. Around, a state governor flying to Abuja with retinue of aides. Dinners and morning, afternoon, night in government offices. You need to understand that this is a pandemic. And so if there's any time for brutal efficiency, it is this time, because every kobo, every naira that can be saved to provide succor for the people needs to be. And that exactly is the narrative that most states have to be. This is not the time to carry on that this was what it was. This is time to really strain the size of government, strain the expense of government, strain the cost of government, and be able to put much more support to your small businesses and people that actually need them. So, that is the problem. The budget for, even in capital projects, there's so many opacity around capital projects. There were states that ran more capital project on government reform. What exactly is government reform when you spend 20 billion on government reform? And your health budget in the state is less than 5 billion. If you read the state of state, we made a copious examples of states that continuously do that, where capital expenditure lack proper classification. Or maybe even the secretary to the state government spends more money on capital expenditure than the health or the education infrastructure of the state. Those are the questions that the state government needs to look inward and ask. Do we exist in government for ourselves, or are we really working for the people? Until those questions are asked, we will keep asking, why is this primary health care center bad? Why are children sitting on the floor in the primary, in the school system? Those are the questions that we should ask. Public resources should be dedicated to the public good, and not just for the benefit of those who serve in public offices.
Issues around the health and education, which is the focus of that your report. But there was something you mentioned about the ease of doing business, and it got me interested, because I remember there was a Presidential Enabling Business Environment Committee set up, headed by the President, PEBEC, and that committee was tasked with the responsibility of facilitating ease of doing business. And they had two specific examples. It was Lagos and Kaduna, and perhaps that explains, why Nigeria seemed to jump a little bit in those two states, for a while. But then when you look at other states, one would have expected that those examples of Lagos and Kaduna would have been replicated in other states, such that the ease of doing business would have made it so much better and more productive for the states. Now, when we talk about ease of doing business, what are the specific challenges that, in your opinion, the SMEs and maybe the private sector face that's not allowing the economy of each of these states to grow as they should?
I mean, when we talk about ease of doing business, we are basically coming down to the efficiency of government bureaucracy. I mean, it's as simple as that. And if we stay on the index, and the index is great, I mean, doing business index is great but the threshold is low. I mean, you have been, the World Bank only rates Nigeria. I mean, when you look at the state of Lagos and Kano states, I mean, the ease of doing business ranking for Nigeria doesn't concern the other states. I mean, there's another report that looks at the ranking for states. I mean, and that's a separate report. And if you look at that report, I mean, we still checked recently, Nigeria still lags behind significant. I mean, Nigerian states lag behind significant. And what are we talking about here? Registration of a property, transfer of property, registration of business, being able to get government permits, being able to pay government levies. How do you make all that process efficient? How do you make sure that it's enabled by technology? How does the bureaucracy that manage that process be able to respond to queries or able to respond to even when their systems break down? Those are the questions that we call ease of doing business. And states have to put enough dedication to that, because I'm bringing an investor into a country or into a state. I need to be able to provide, to ease the process into it for the person. Payment of taxes. How do you pay taxes? How easy it is for people to be able to log on platforms or systems and pay taxes, and how are they audited so that the whole process is efficient? And those are the low-hanging fruits that a state can make a decision to say, on this index of the World Bank, or on this coefficient that the World Bank actually measures, I'm going to take 10, 20 steps forward. I mean, those are the kind of conversations that we should have as a country. But it's so unfortunate that we don't have those conversations. We don't even look at those coefficients to say, someone is trying to check across countries in Africa and is asking myself, where does Nigeria stand on ease of doing, and which state is being more proactive? And you can't even find Nigerian states doing well about that. And I think these are the questions that the National Economic Council should answer. I mean, how does every state go back and ensure that on the ease of doing business rank or the coefficients, they are doing far better than it is? Because that's even the first litmus test for you to attract investment in your state.
These things go straight to the heart of the poverty index and the unemployment index as well. So how do we find our way out of these?
I mean, see, we look at Nigeria and we have to understand that there's no exceptionality about our story. Everybody in Nigeria, either poverty or unemployment, either Vietnam, India, China, even Britain. I mean, I had incredible levels of poverty or unemployment at the time, but everybody sits down and analyzes where exactly is my competitive advantage. We have a great story now going around import substitution, but it's great to talk about import substitution. But import substitution is not going to solve our problem. It's not going to lift us out of the poverty or unemployment crisis. We have to plug our economy to the global economy. It's as simple as ABC. It's not going to be sudden. It's not going to be immediate, but it has to be the target. Because for someone that cuts flour in Kenya, that makes dresses in Vietnam, either for Gap or either for all these international brands, it's an opportunity for a job. And that's exactly where our problem lies. We sit down today and dollar is $500 on the streets, it's $480, it's going AY. Why? Because the underlying commodity that drives our foreign exchange is subject to price variation. So currency variation in Nigeria is not the same situation in a non-oil economy like Kenya. I mean, I visited Kenya somewhere in 2010 or 2012. The shillings, Kenya shillings was exchanging for 90 shillings, to $1. It's 110 shillings right now. I mean, that's over almost 10 to 80 years. I mean, compare that to Nigeria when it was around 150, 160 there. Now we're talking about 480. Because, and these questions that we need to delink our FX earning from oil. And the only way we're going to do that is to be able to pay attention to exports. And that's discipline. And because exports require discipline, because you are competing on a global scale, we have not come across like we want to imbibe that discipline to do the work. Until we are ready to do the work, where the person in Plateau is exporting flowers, and he can get the flowers in the cold storage down to the port in Lagos or anywhere in Onitsha, he can get it out to Europe. When someone else in Oyo is exporting food for the diaspora market, when someone else in Taraba is exporting tea and coffee, those are the reasons when we know that Nigeria is ready to be a country that wants to change its story. But this whole idea of we need to eat what we preserve, we need to, manage what we need. I mean, it's just us, enduring poverty. It's not going to take us anywhere. And those are the questions where policymakers need to sit down. What is your pathway to export? We need a port system that is quality. We need a financial market that is more sophisticated. We need infrastructure that can take the goods there. We need power. So those are the kind of questions that come on the table, and we see that we need a roadmap, we need a structure. But constantly trying to conserve dollars and trying to manage the imports, I mean, it's just not making sense. South Africa's imports is almost $83 billion. Nigeria's imports is around $50 billion. So it's not even like our imports are that great. So why are we always shouting, oh, we are importing too much? We are not importing too much for the size of our economy or the size of population we have. We're just not exporting enough. The same way we're not making enough revenue. And those are the questions that we should come on the table, and the discipline that comes across with it, and the long-term thinking that we can use to deliver all of that. And it's always painful because I believe that policymakers should be able to sit down and ask ourselves, why does every time oil prices are sinking low, our currency is losing value? And anybody who's going to invest in your country will think about macroeconomic stability. All the work Obasanjo did in 4 years for the second time of his reign around macroeconomic stability, banks being more stronger, the currency being more stable, was just because you have to be in that space to be able to attract investment. But when we have as a country where the state policy now looks like we have to manage what we have and we have to just keep running around within the same stuff, we are not going to go far in any way that way. That is not the way economies go. China did all of that. Taiwan did all of that. Japan did all of that. For growth to geometrically happen, you have to look outward, and it requires a whole lot of discipline.
Now, moving forward, I mean, there are projections that Nigeria will get out of this recession early next year. In fact, some are saying in record time compared to what we had in the previous recession that Nigeria got into. So, I mean, looking at the trends, are you seeing Nigeria getting out of this recession figure-wise and reality-wise? Because for some people, Nigeria never came out of that previous recession. So, first, do you see Nigeria coming out of that recession in what some people have called record time?
Okay, I mean, that's an incredible question. But we have to first disaggregate the GDP of Nigeria to really understand when we get out of recession. Because even being able to, we had a 3% dip, and the saving grace we have are two sectors, telecoms and banking. I mean, take out those two sectors, we'll be at maybe -10. There's a critical sector that we don't look at. That's the trade sector. For almost 7 quarters, the trade sector had been in negative territory. I mean, and that's the sector of what you call the yalojas, the yalajes. That's the sector of where those who are exporting. That's the sector of those who are doing the retail and the wholesale trade. I mean, that's the sector that when people say the money is not circulating in the economy, that is exactly the sector you look specifically at. So when we say we can get out of recession in China, we can even get out of recession before. If you get a good bump in telecom sector and maybe the financial sector, maybe agricultural does maybe above 2%, yes, you can get out of recession. Mathematically, that looks good. But in reality-wise, you also are going to look at that sector. Is your insurance sector out of recession? No. Is your trade sector out of recession? No. I mean, is your agricultural sector growing at even 3%? No. I mean, so, and agriculture sector is like 25% of your GDP. We're also going to look at the GDP composition on the other side, which is when you look at consumption investment. I mean, how much investment is coming into your country? How much consumption is happening within the economy? And how much net exports are you having? So by the time you look at all of that, you might marginally come across the Rubicon because somehow two sectors are taking you off. or maybe oil gets a bump and you climb out of that. But you will look at the economy as a whole, that in the spaces where it touches more people, you're going to ask yourself, are those sectors growing as they should grow? I mean, that's why when we look at those GDP numbers, we need to be able to disaggregate them and look clearly and much more intentionally, about which sectors are actually growing and which ones are not growing, before we just take the headline and say, oh yeah, we're out of recession. And for us to do those things is to be intentional about how we invest in those sectors. There's a huge conversation on agriculture. Yeah.
Well, I wanted you to say something about agriculture, but more from the security angle. A number of people are unable to go to the markets. A number of people are unable to go to their farms. For road infrastructure, taking the market from the farm settlements to the towns is an issue. Even to go farm, do the farming itself, is the issue of security. How significant, from where you sit, are those challenges in the whole scheme of things?
It's happening already. I mean, it's happening already. Food prices are off the roof. I mean, food inflation is continuously rising, and you have food. I mean, it's not like there's no production. I mean, there's some level. There's production. Production has dipped, but you can't even get the food out of the production centers, and that is really a real big problem. And that's why when people talk about security as a fundamental frame, for an economy that would grow, it's not like a joke, or it's not a trite statement. It's an important fact. So the federal government has to find a way, to guarantee the security. I mean, we are hearing funny stories around farmers paying taxes, paying levies to be able to harvest their crops and things like that. Those are not things that will engender agricultural growth. There also has to be conversation also around the kind of agriculture we do. Because the kind of agriculture we do is not going to take people out of poverty. The MBS report, the poverty report, showed that households that either had the head of the household had limited education or was involved in agriculture were the poorest households. I mean, those were where the MBS figures showed. I mean, and it's something that there has to be conversation around the scale of agriculture that we are doing. Because there's always this push about go back to agriculture, go back to agriculture. The kind of agriculture of this age does not require a multitude of people. It requires science, it requires technology, and it requires quality seedlings. And
that's actually a great place to anchor. So, I mean, we can hold on to that if we're going to move forward. But I know we can go on with this conversation, especially with you, the Director of Budget, Onigbinde. I would like to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the state of states in Nigeria.
Thank you.
Well, I guess